Hey guys, Kiwi here. In this video, I'll be breaking down and analyzing more recent news surfacing about what exactly caused the major character death in the Season 8 mid-season finale for The Walking Dead. With that being said, warning a huge spoilers for everything in the show up to the most recent episode, Season 8 Episode 8, How It's Gonna Be, along with issues 126 and 127 of the comics, and let's jump right into this. So, as I mentioned in my initial reactions to the episode, the unconfirmed spoilers are kind of sadly true, and Carl is confirmed to die in the next episode, the mid-season premiere of Season 8. Now, as of the end of episode 808, the shocking moment was in fact Carl pulling up his shirt, revealing that he is bitten on the side of his torso. Now, in a second video following this one, I will be discussing more about the spoilers, along with what was spoiled and what wasn't and why, but in this video, I wanted to discuss the actual decision to kill off Carl, why the show went with it, and how it will continue moving on. So, ever since spring of this year, people have been speculating that Carl would leave the show due to his multi-year contract coming to an end. Whenever that was, it may have even been the end of 2016, beginning of 2017, around that time. Chandler apparently signed a 7-year contract when the show started, and normally when a contract for an actor ends like this, especially when they're a main character, they just sign and renew it without much publicity, but for some reason Carl's renewal became a huge discussion. I'm not sure why. Thinking about it in hindsight, it may have just been a sheer coincidence, but again, I'm not sure if it had something to do with it. Anyways, back when all that was happening, Carl's actor, Chandler Riggs, apparently was talking about wanting to go back to school, and fans were speculating about him possibly not signing back onto the show. The theorizing went on as fans wondered whether or not Chandler was actually going to ask to be written off the show, but that ended up not being the case. As of last night, right after the Season 8 mid-season finale aired, I'm not sure quite when, but there was an article published on HollywoodReporter.com including an interview with Chandler Riggs about Carl's shocking death on the show. Now, I'll go ahead and read through this, but I'll also put the link in the description. Feel free to read through it yourself, but the general consensus is that Chandler didn't actually want to leave the show, and that it wasn't his decision whatsoever. Alright, so the interviewer's questions are in bold, and Chandler's answers are just below them, so let's go ahead and jump right into this. So, you recently were accepted to college. Was it your decision to leave The Walking Dead? And Chandler says, I'm taking a gap year right now to focus on acting for a while. Leaving Walking Dead wasn't my decision. It was all story related. It made sense story-wise for it to happen for Rick and Michonne and all the other characters. So, it wasn't Chandler's decision. It was all story related apparently. That's the reason why this happened, but let's go ahead and get more into it. So, when did you find out? He says, I was planning on going to college until I found out. I found out when I was doing rehearsals for episode 6 back in June. So episode 6 of season 8, that's just 2 episodes before his death is revealed. He had no clue. He was probably signed on for God knows how long, and he just got the news. He says, it was quite a shocker for me, Andy, and everyone else, because I don't think anyone saw it coming. So yeah, no one on the cast knew it was going to happen, including Chandler Riggs himself. And then he goes on to say things trying to bring positivity into the article, saying it's definitely not a bad thing because it's been awesome being on the show, and also now I get to go and do a lot of other stuff I haven't gotten to do before, which is true because Chandler Riggs has been on the show for a really long time, and that's part of why fans thought that he might want to be written off the show, because he was just sick of it or didn't want to be on it anymore or was just jumping ship. But no, apparently that is not the case whatsoever. Anyways, Scott wanted to meet in person because it was such a big deal. We had just finished rehearsing for a scene in episode 6, and he wanted to meet with me and my mom and dad and talk about what's going to happen. So yeah, end of episode 6, he found out back in June, that's summer 2017. So why did Scott Gimple decide this? I've said before that the show creators and show runners would have to be complete lunatics to kill off Carl this early, but what was Gimple's logical explanation behind this? He's taking all the blame, so he must clearly have a reason, right? Scott Gimple is to blame for this, as the article pretty much confirms that it was his decision and his decision alone. But is that true? Is he really the sole decider in this, or is he just the one willingly taking all the blame for it? I'd personally like to hear what Robert Kirkman has to say about it, but that's just me. I'm not saying go hate on Scott Gimple, because I don't even think we have the full story yet. I put a question mark in the title because although Scott Gimple seems to be taking all the flack here, there may have been more going on behind closed doors. Moving on, the article gets into Scott's reasoning for killing off Carl, and in order to answer that, Scott Gimple actually spoils the ending of All Out War in this article by confirming that they're going to stick with the comic book ending. I guess technically this is Chandler Riggs talking, but this must have been what Scott Gimple told him to say to fans and interviewers. So he says that in the comics, Scott was trying to figure out why there was a hole between Rick slitting Negan's throat at the end of the All Out War arc, and then there's the time jump and Negan is alive and in prison and Rick didn't kill Negan. Scott was trying to figure out how to bridge the gap between Rick not wanting to kill Negan and Rick also really wanting to kill Negan, which he does right now in the show's story. Scott's way to get around that was to make Carl this really humanitarian figure and person who could see the good in people and see that people can change and not everyone out there is bad. That's what Carl's talk to Rick was in this episode. There's no way that they can kill every one of the saviors and not everyone is a bad person, and there has to be some way forward than just killing people. So yeah, they decided to turn Carl into like this moral compass character, but isn't that kind of what Morgan was, and he got rehabilitated by Eastman to believe that everyone can change and not everyone out there is bad? That's why he made that prison cell, that's why he believes all life is precious, and I guess he is going rogue right now, and obviously, sorry Morgan, but Rick would be more impacted by Carl's death than Morgan's, so obviously that's why they decided to turn Carl into this humanitarian figure, but come on, that already is kinda Morgan's shtick, don't you think? Moving on, you're as big of a fan of the comics as anyone out there. How did you respond to Carl being killed off, especially considering he's still alive and kicking ass in the comics? This I was really interested in. So, it was devastating for me and my family because the show has been such a huge part of my life for so long. For a few days we didn't know what to do. I just bought a house in Sonoy, near where the show films in Georgia. So Carl literally bought a house where they film because he thought he would be on the show for a really long time, and they just killed him off. He continues to say that it was a big deal that I wouldn't be on anymore. I decided that I wanted to not go to college for at least a year and move to LA and focus on acting and music. It ended up being a great thing because now I get to do all kinds of other stuff I haven't been able to do in the last 8 years. Did you talk with Robert Kirkman about this major shift? Are you disappointed you won't get to film a lot of what happens with Carl in the comics, like the arc with the Whispers? I don't think I've talked with Kirkman about it at all. If we did, it was briefly at Comic-Con in San Diego. I don't talk to Robert that much unless it's press related. I was excited to do a lot of these storylines in the comics because there's a lot of really cool stuff. So first off, isn't that strange that he doesn't recall talking to Kirkman at all? Maybe he just doesn't have a comment on this, but I don't think he'd lie about this. I think this straight up means that he just didn't even talk to Robert Kirkman. So who did he talk about it to? Did Scott Gimple literally just pull him aside one day with his parents and be like, hey, yo, you're kind of getting written off for the show. This is happening. Sorry. Like, what the heck? I want to know what happened behind the curtains. What were the conversations going on between Kirkman and Gimple and everyone else who does the show writers, the show creators? What the heck? Is the budget involved? Like, I want to know. And now Chandler Riggs does say that he's more excited to do other things than Walking Dead than he was excited about doing those Whisperer things on The Walking Dead. So that's a little bit strange wording, I'm not gonna lie, but he's pretty much saying that he's more excited to do things other than The Walking Dead. So is he just looking on the bright side, or what the heck, did he actually not really care about the Whisperer story arc? When they mention above that Carl's still alive in the comics, Chandler Riggs just kind of switches the conversation about how he bought a house and how he's moving to LA now, and then afterwards he says that he's more excited to do things other than The Walking Dead, so he's not really talking too much about his opinions on the comic book Carl. But back to the interview. Outside of killing Rick, this is the biggest departure the show can make from the comics. How do you think this fundamentally changes the show? I don't know how it was going to pan out with Rick trying to move forward past this, because the whole reason he was pushing forward was to protect Carl and to raise him into having him follow in his footsteps and to have Carl be the leader one day. I don't know how Rick and Michonne are going to handle it. I guess I'll have to watch and find out. Were you surprised that they opted to kill Carl rather than just say have him go live at the hilltop as in the comics? I didn't expect for Carl to ever get killed off, but it serves as a good purpose in the story. There's still a little more left in Carl's story in episode 9, the mid-season premiere in 2018, and that impacts Rick, Michonne, and everyone. Although Carl's story is coming to an end, it's not over yet. And that is true, guys, we have one more episode of Carl, although it's probably going to be very depressing. Now, when they say opted to kill Carl rather than just have him go live at the hilltop, what do they mean by that exactly? Would having him go live at the hilltop mean that he's not on screen as often, meaning that it's not costing the show as much money? Is the budget the issue here? The budget's been literally the issue for everything bad going on with the show ever since like the beginning of season 7. Even though I love this show, it's a glaring issue and I could straight up make a huge 45-minute video discussing it. Hell, I might in the future if it really gets bad, but did this really cause Carl to get killed off? I really want to know why the heck they decided this. Was there any discussion about not killing Carl off and leaving the door open for you to return? He says, I have no clue to be honest. When Scott told me, that was his decision. So again, Chandler Riggs just putting the blame on Scott. In a larger sense, Carl winds up sacrificing his life to save someone he didn't know, Sadiq. Is he dying a hero? I definitely think so. It wasn't saving Sadiq, it was saving all of Alexandria. He was the reason that they all got to safety, because he stalled the saviors and prevented them from finding any Alexandrians with his smoke grenades, and he led them away from everyone and saved everyone. It was a pretty cool way to go out. In the terms of timelines, it is now clear that the teary/red-eyed Rick in the season 8 premiere is his response to Carl's death. It definitely could be. I haven't seen any future footage, but it's definitely possible that that was Rick's reaction to Carl, but you never know. So Carl literally has no idea what's going on in the show after season 8 episode 9 apparently. He wasn't filming anymore after that episode, he wasn't there while they were shooting, he just doesn't know. Apparently they just didn't tell him. There's still the old man Rick scene that is now clearly not a flash forward to the time jumps from the comics. Do you think that's a vision of a future that Rick could be having maybe on his deathbed? It's possible it's a vision or another version of the future. That whole scene was taken almost directly out of inspiration from the time jump in the comics, so it could be the future, it could be a vision, or it could just be something else. And then here they discuss more about whether or not Rick will die. That's not really the topic of this video, but Chandler Riggs responds saying that apparently Andrew Lincoln has to leave every year from his family to come to Georgia for months and months to film The Walking Dead, leaving his kids back home in England. I know he's probably getting pretty tired, so oh my god, it's bad enough that they're killing off Carl. If they kill off Rick in like a season or so, geez, I don't even know how to react. Now, the mid-season premiere is going to show Carl in his dying moments. What can you say about that episode? Episode 809 is really Carl trying to teach Rick as much as he can about what he's learned and what he's trying to convince Rick not to kill every single savior because there's still good people out there. So pretty much we'll just see a bunch more of Carl being a moral compass, just pretty much trying to change Rick's mind. Now, I think it's really bad that they have to come out and tell us that this is why they're killing off Carl and explain and spoil that most of the next episode will focus on this reason in order for us to understand and accept it, along with the fact that they had to spoil the end of the season by telling us that they're not going to kill Negan and keep it the same as the comics. Like, think about this. They pretty much spoiled the next episode and the end of the season, the mid-season premiere, and the season 8 finale. Are you kidding me? All because they have to explain why they're killing Carl. How much more will viewers see of you in the second half of season 8, or is the mid-season premiere it for you? You'll see bits and pieces and memories of Carl throughout the second half, but his final moments are coming pretty soon. So, considering that Chandler Riggs says that he didn't do any filming or anything past episode 809 and that he doesn't know what's going to happen in the show past that, I feel like if we get any flashbacks of Carl or any like future visions of Carl past episode 809, it's going to be featuring clips of him from previous seasons. Like, for example, how Eugene saw or envisioned that shot of Sasha from the season 7 finale when he was going down to get that MP3 player. I mention all of this because if Chandler Riggs only knows what happens in the show up to episode 809 and he hasn't filmed for anything afterwards, then that means that if there's any visions of him in the future, that there's no new scenes of him, because it's not like they just give the actor no context and not tell him who he's talking to and be like, yo, we need to film this vision of you, but we can't tell you when it's gonna be and what it's gonna be about. So yeah, if we see Carl past episode 809, it's probably just gonna be a flashback from an earlier episode. Sorry if that was confusing, but let's move on. Carl's mother, Lori, died in childbirth, and he had to be the one to put her down for good so she wouldn't turn into one of the undead. Is there a world in which Carl does something to prevent Rick and Michonne from the heartbreak of having to do something similar? Yes, definitely. Carl in his final moments is trying to teach Rick what he can so Rick doesn't make any more of the same mistakes that he has in the past. Carl has been watching this the whole time and learning from Rick and seeing what he's done right and what he's done wrong, and Carl has come out of that as a very wise and old soul. Carl is going to try and give Rick every last bit of advice that he can. Geez, Chandler, you cannot push that enough. I get it, we're gonna get a lot of moral compass action next episode. But all joking aside, apparently Carl is going to inform Rick what he has thought of their entire journey post-apocalypse from a third-person perspective. With Carl no longer the future of the show, do you have any theories on how The Walking Dead will end when it's all said and done? I have no clue. I've never had a hypothesis on how the show or comics would end. For the comics, Robert Kirkman has plans for hundreds of more comics. There's no telling what character is going to be alive or dead, or if there's going to be a complete new cast of characters by the end of the comic or TV show. There's just no way to tell. Unlike the comics, Judith is still alive on the show. Could she be the future of the show? It's possible. Rick doesn't have the same connection to Judith that he has with Carl, since Shane is likely her biological father, so Rick may try and make up for it and try and raise her to fill the shoes that Carl was supposed to take. And that is possible. There are people that could take Carl's shoes. There could be Enid if they want to do a whole gender swap thing. There's also Judith. Or if they didn't want to do that, there's maybe Henry from the Kingdom. Like, there are people that can take these storylines that Carl has from the comics, but I've said this in a previous video and I'll say it again. No one is Carl. No one can fill Carl's shoes, at least in my opinion. Now, they could just completely replace Carl and it could still work, but it just wouldn't work as well and it wouldn't be the same. As a comic book reader, I am definitely disappointed because Carl just had so much potential and I was so excited to see him post All Out War in the New Beginning, but now we'll never see that, because apparently turning Carl into a moral compass for half a season just to kill him off was supposed to convince Rick that his mercy will prevail over his wrath, causing him to change his mind and not kill Negan. As we know, Rick is very determined to kill Negan in the show, but things are quite different in the comic books. In the comics, the roles between Rick and Negan are practically reversed. Carl was actually the one who repeatedly told Rick that he needed to kill Negan, while Rick instead decides to keep him alive. Carl is first mad at Rick for not wanting to kill Negan, but as time moves on, he eventually understands. In the show, ever since the beginning of Season 7, Rick has promised multiple times that he will kill Negan. He said it in the premiere and the finale for Season 7, along with multiple times in Season 8. And on top of that, every time Rick says this or mentions it, he seems more and more determined that it will in fact happen. Now, me watching the show as a comic book reader, I've known for a while that Negan won't die at the end of the war. Every time I've heard Rick say, "I'm gonna kill you," to Negan, I just kinda roll my eyes and laugh as I tell myself, it's funny cause you won't kill him. Now, although I thought it was obvious, that's clear only because I know the potential future, and it's a little bit pretentious of me to think that way. When you stop thinking about the end goal and start thinking about how they're going to build the path along the way, I haven't actually questioned what would possibly change Rick's mind so much in the show, causing him not to kill Negan even though he said that he would so many times. I just figured that he would slowly change his mind over time by the end of the war, but that hasn't happened whatsoever. I thought maybe Jesus would just kind of convince Rick to keep Negan as a prisoner, since Jesus is all about prisoners and Morgan built that cell back in Season 6, but as time goes on in the show, Rick just wants to kill Negan more and more. Scott Gimple realized that they needed to actually create a solid reason to have Rick change his mind in order to give Negan mercy. They wanted to line up Rick's mentality about keeping prisoners to how he feels about it in the comics, but apparently the only thing that they could think of to do that would be impactful enough would be to kill off Carl. Now, that's just kind of ridiculous how they're acting like this is necessary. As I said earlier, they're acting like this is the main reason, but it's probably just the excuse or explanation that they have for it. They could have used any character or number of characters for a sudden shocking death or multiple deaths. It didn't have to be Carl. The only reason why they chose Carl was to change Rick's mind about killing Negan once he defeats him. Yes, it does kind of push the story forward as far as changing Rick's mind about mercy, but it is very sudden and it just feels like more of an excuse than anything. It's like Scott Gimple realized how different Rick's motives were in the show compared to the comics, and so he panicked about how to connect this. The only thing he could think of was killing off Carl, and so he just went with it. What I want to know is when he made this decision. Was it between seasons 7 and 8, or was this planned out ever since the end of season 6 with Negan's introduction? I feel like he only thought of this in between seasons 7 and 8, and that killing off Carl was his way of writing them out of a plot hole, along with giving potential shock value as well. And if they wanted to create a shocking death moment such as the Red Wedding or an early character death in Game of Thrones, I feel like they've failed here. I don't really like comparing the two shows, but Game of Thrones is just the best at shocking character deaths. If you've seen the show, you know what I'm talking about, and sometimes it does kind of feel like other shows are trying to just grab that shock factor, but they just don't do it correctly. In a previous video, I made the point that some of the more shocking deaths in Game of Thrones were so successful because they pushed the story forward into plenty of new interesting directions while changing everything you think you knew about the story writing. Also, the characters that died in Game of Thrones died in the original book source material as well. It was supposed to happen, and there's a lot of story to come of it. In the comics of The Walking Dead, Carl is the story. How will killing him off help? Answer: it just simply won't. Most premieres and finales for The Walking Dead have had huge moments such as character deaths anyways, so it probably felt like knocking out two birds with one stone, shoving Carl in there. On top of it, they used this as a way to introduce Sadiq as well. It's like they just kept thinking of reasons that it would counteract Carl's death as they actually tried to attempt to make it worth killing Carl off. In my opinion, the show creators can set up and create as many reasons and excuses they can think of in order to have Carl's death affect the story and actually be useful, but it seems like a cop-out to me. No matter what they try and say, nothing is worth losing Carl's future story arcs from the New Beginning, the Whisper War, and even afterwards. Carl is still alive right now in the comics, and honestly, his most kick-ass moments in the series happen within the time span between where the show is currently and where the comics are currently. Carl has barely gotten any screen time since season 7. He did have that whole sing me a song stuff, but that was pretty much it. It now feels like wasted potential that they didn't have him on screen more during recent episodes. I understand that they usually give characters that are going to die soon more screen time, so it would have been a tell, and so they did a good job in that aspect of it keeping it a surprise, but I still feel like Carl was underused as a character, and it really does seem like he was snatched away from us before his character even got good. Now, I'm just trying to think about how I would react if I didn't know anything from the comics if I was just a TV show viewer. I wouldn't be as disappointed because I wouldn't know about Carl's potential future, but I feel like I'd just go look it up online anyways and get disappointed anyways. Maybe I'd get disappointed less because I wouldn't have been anticipating Carl's potential future like I have been, but I'd still be like, aw man, it's a shame we won't see Carl during these crazy situations on the big screen. Because even if I didn't know about the comic book material, they're still mentioning that stuff everywhere. Just think about what they mentioned in the interview and what they spoiled, how I mentioned that earlier. If you don't know anything from the comics, you're gonna get spoiled stuff anyways. And it's really quite a shame that it's up to them to dictate what's worth and not worth spoiling from the comics, but let me know what you guys thought about all of this down below, along with what I should focus my future videos on next. I'd appreciate a like on the video if you've enjoyed anything I've said today, or even subscribe for more Walking Dead Season 8 content in the near future. If you'd like to take that extra step in helping support my videos, consider checking out my Patreon, where there's a bunch of different rewards involving the channel, such as a chance to directly influence the videos being produced. It isn't necessary by any means, but it could really help in the long run. But as always, I thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.